The alarm had been screaming for 3 hours before the Catherine transport ship finally limped into Docking Bay 7. Commander Erix's communications officer had tried every standard protocol, but the ship's distress beacon told a story that words couldn't. Critical life support failure, engines at 15%, and 3 biosignatures that shouldn't have been there at all. Dr. Sarah Chen was already in the med bay when the airlock cycled open. She'd been on the station for 8 months now, the only human medical officer in a facility that serviced 47 different species. The other doctors called her the mammal specialist, though never to her face. They meant it as a compliment, mostly. The Catherine captain stumbled through first, her gray-scaled skin mottled with stress marks. Behind her came 2 crew members carrying what looked like a makeshift containment pod. Sarah's translator earpiece crackled to life. "We found them drifting," the captain gasped, her breathing labored. "Escape pod, old model, very old. The adults were already gone." Sarah stepped forward as they lowered the pod onto the exam table. Through the transparent panel, she could see them. 3 small forms huddled together, their fur matted and bodies trembling. They looked like a cross between bear cubs and tiger kittens, with oversized paws and striped patterns that shifted colors in the light. Their species designation flashed on her medical scanner: Valorian. Status: critically endangered. Last known population: unknown. "How long were they out there?" Sarah asked, her hands already working to open the pod safely. "We estimate 6 days, maybe 7. The pod's life support was failing when we found them." 6 days. Sarah felt her chest tighten. These cubs couldn't have been more than a few months old. They should have been with their parents, their pack, learning to hunt in whatever forests or mountains their species called home. Instead, they'd been alone in the dark, drifting through space, watching their parents die. The pod opened with a hiss. The cubs didn't move. They were conscious. Their eyes tracked her movements, but they'd gone into what her scanner identified as a severe trauma-induced shutdown. Their hearts were beating too slowly, body temperatures dropping. This wasn't just physical injury, this was the kind of damage that happened when young creatures lost everything. "I need everyone out," Sarah said quietly. "Now." The Catherine captain started to protest, but something in Sarah's tone stopped her. They filed out, leaving Sarah alone with 3 dying children who weren't even her species. She'd seen this before, back on Earth, the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center where she'd volunteered during medical school. Orphaned bear cubs brought in after their mothers were killed. The shutdown was the same. When young mammals lost their parents, especially social species, sometimes the will to live just stopped. Sarah pulled up a stool and sat down at eye level with the cubs. She didn't reach for them, didn't make any sudden moves, just sat there, letting them see her, smell her, understand that she wasn't a threat. "Hey there, little ones," she whispered. "I know you're scared. I know everything is wrong right now." The largest cub, maybe the oldest by a few weeks, let out a sound somewhere between a whimper and a growl. Its siblings pressed closer to it, seeking comfort that none of them could provide. Sarah had read the Valorian file during her initial station training. Highly social, pack-bonded. Cubs remained with their parents for 3 years, learning complex hunting techniques and social structures. They were intelligent, possibly sapient, though their population had been decimated before proper first contact protocols could be established. The species had been caught in the crossfire of a territorial dispute between 2 warring factions. Most of their homeworld was now a toxic wasteland. These 3 might be the last of their kind. She couldn't think about that now. Right now, 3 children needed her to help them survive the next hour, then the next day, then the next week. Sarah stood slowly and moved to her supply cabinet. She'd learned early in her career that medical equipment often frightened patients, especially young ones. So she did what she'd always done. She made it a game, a story, a distraction. "You know what I think?" she said, pulling out warming blankets that looked nothing like the standard issue thermal sheets. These were soft, textured, in gentle colors. She'd replicated them herself using her personal fabricator allowance. "I think you three are probably hungry and cold, and you probably miss your mom and dad so much it feels like your chest is breaking." The cubs' ears twitched. They were listening. "I can't bring them back," Sarah continued, her voice steady even though her own eyes were burning. "I wish I could, but I can't. What I can do is make sure you're warm and fed and safe, and that someone's here with you so you're not alone." She approached slowly, the blankets held loosely in her hands. The largest cub's lips pulled back, showing small, sharp teeth. A warning. Sarah stopped. "That's okay," she said. "You don't trust me yet. That's smart. Your parents taught you well." She set the blankets on the exam table within reach and stepped back. Then she did something that would have horrified the station's head physician. She sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, and pulled off her shoes. The action was deliberately vulnerable. She made herself smaller, lower, less threatening, and she waited. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Sarah pulled up her data pad and started making notes, humming softly under her breath. It was an old earth lullaby her grandmother used to sing. She'd sung it to countless frightened animals over the years. She sang it now. One of the smaller cubs moved first, just a shift of position, ears rotating toward the sound of Sarah's voice. Then another movement, stretching one paw toward the edge of the blanket Sarah had left. "That's it," Sarah murmured. "It's soft, isn't it? Go ahead." The cub pulled the blanket closer, and the other two immediately burrowed into it, seeking warmth and comfort. Sarah kept singing, kept making her notes, kept being a calm, steady presence in their terrifying new reality. Another hour passed. The cub's vital signs started to improve. Body temperatures rising, heart rates stabilizing. They were still in crisis, but they'd pulled back from the immediate edge. Sarah stood slowly and moved to her medical fabricator. The cubs watched her with wide eyes, but they didn't retreat. She programmed in a formula she'd been working on, a nutrient paste that could be adjusted for almost any mammalian biology. The fabricator hummed, and she pulled out 3 small bottles with soft feeding tips. "Dinner time," she announced, moving back to the exam table. "I'm going to set these here, and you can decide if you want them." She placed the bottles within reach and returned to her spot on the floor. The cubs stared at the bottles, then at her, then at the bottles again. The largest one crept forward first, sniffing cautiously. Then it latched onto the feeding tip and began to drink desperately. The other 2 followed immediately. Small paws scrambling, soft chirping sounds filling the med bay. They were starving. Of course they were. Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "That's my brave ones. Eat as much as you need, there's plenty more." They ate until their small bellies were round, then collapsed in a pile, still wrapped in the blankets. But they didn't sleep. Their eyes stayed open, watching Sarah, waiting for the next threat, the next loss, the next terrible thing. "I know," Sarah whispered. "I know you can't rest, but I'm going to stay right here. I promise." She dimmed the light slowly, bringing the harsh white medical glare down to a soft amber that mimicked sunset. The cubs' bodies relaxed slightly in the gentler light. Then Sarah did something else that would have violated about 15 different station protocols. She started talking to them. Not in medical terms or scientific observations. She told them stories. Stories about Earth, about forests and mountains and oceans. Stories about other cubs she'd helped. Other frightened children who'd survived impossible things. Stories about being scared and sad and angry, and how all of those feelings were okay, were normal, were survivable. Her voice filled the quiet med bay, steady and warm and relentlessly present. She told them about wolf packs and bear families and how mammals took care of each other, how pack bonds could be rebuilt, how new families could form even after terrible losses. The cubs' eyes began to droop. They fought it, their heads jerking back up every time they started to slip into sleep. But Sarah's voice continued, her presence remained, and slowly, their exhausted bodies began to win the battle against their traumatized minds. The smallest cub's eyes closed first, then the middle one. The largest held out the longest, staring at Sarah with an expression that looked heartbreakingly like hope mixed with terror. Hope that this safe moment might last, terror that it wouldn't. "I'm still here," Sarah whispered. "I'll be here when you wake up, I promise." Finally, the last cub's eyes closed. Its breathing deepened. And then, in a movement that made Sarah's breath catch, it uncurled from its siblings and crawled to the edge of the exam table, closer to where Sarah sat. It climbed down carefully, walked across the few feet of floor between them, and curled up beside her shoes. The other two cubs followed moments later, instinct driving them to stay close to their sibling, to maintain the pack bond. They arranged themselves in a small pile tucked against Sarah's feet, their warm bodies pressed against her legs. Sarah didn't move, could barely breathe. These three orphaned cubs, the last of their kind, had chosen to trust her, had chosen to believe that this strange creature from another world might keep them safe. She pulled up her data pad and began making real medical notes now, documenting their conditions, planning their treatment protocols, researching Valorian developmental needs. She had so much work ahead of her. These cubs would need round-the-clock care for months. She'd need to petition the station council for resources, for space, for permission to keep them here instead of transferring them to a xenobiological research facility. She'd fight whatever battles she needed to fight. Because that's what humans did. They saw children in need, and they stepped up. They stayed. They kept promises to frighten cubs in the dark. The medbay's environmental controls whispered softly. The station's pulse hummed through the walls. And three Valorian cubs, warm and fed and finally safe enough to let go, slept peacefully beside the shoes of the human woman who'd given them back their will to live. Sarah kept watch through the night, as mammals had watched over their young since the beginning of time. And when the station's morning cycle began, when the lights slowly brightened and the cubs stirred awake with momentary panic before remembering where they were, Sarah was still there. "Good morning, little ones," she said softly. "Ready for breakfast?" Three small faces looked up at her, and for the first time, their tails wagged. It was the smallest gesture, the faintest sign of hope. But in that moment, Sarah knew they would survive. All four of them, together, would figure out what came next, because that's what family did.